मगर कम बात करूंगी and to the point. Today is meant to commemorate Benazir Bhutto's tragic death. And as Pakistan spirals down the tubes towards the proverbial rock bottom, I'm reminded of a statement I made days after Benazir's death on December 27th, 2007, that the history of Pakistan will eventually come to be seen as one preceding and following her death and departure from the political scene. I said that because at that time I intuitively sensed that with all the hype surrounding the merits of neoliberalism and the market and the retreat of an already underperforming state from key sectors like health and education, there was nothing to prevent really the complete collapse of moral values, of any sense of ownership to the collective mess that is Pakistan, far less to the misery of its people, and the continued added misery of its people that is coming ahead as well. And that is exactly what has happened, as we've seen, a decline in the very conception of governance and its replacement with what I call performative politics, where pretense replaces considered policy and careful implementation. Few stalwarts of Pakistani politics have escaped the blight of neoliberal thinking, not even Bibi, as she is fondly referred to by her friends. But even as she came to embrace in the left-leaning, even as she came to embrace the logic of neoliberalism, diluting her father's and the PPP's left-leaning stance in the economic domain, she did not abandon her conscience when she saw injustice and the need to take a strong moral stance. With her gone, it is rare to find anyone asking questions that must be asked of public servants, whether elected or unelected. What is happening to Pakistan, where people are routinely either being lynched or murdered, women are being, there's a femicide going on, and the lynching is going beyond measure by emotionally charged vigilante mobs, while the rulers play politics, much as Nero fiddled while Rome burned. Things have changed dramatically since Benazir was Prime Minister of Pakistan, and without her stabilizing influence, anything and everything, it seems, can be justified in the name of politics, so long as it is couched in the language of quote-unquote religion. Could she have reversed these trends? It's a question worth asking. And I think it's difficult to say for sure, given that Bibi had to make so many compromises in order to scale the heights of state power in the first place. And as she was the first to acknowledge, her hands were tied on a range of issues, but she was always willing to consider ways of creating alternative spaces to try and achieve the goal. Like her father, who famously said that he would much rather be destroyed by the military than by history, Bibi had an acute sense of history, and I think history eventually will have to judge her as we come to know more, as we think more as the time passes. When she became the first time she became Prime Minister in 1988, I actually requested an interview with her. My only time that I have, even though we've talked many times since. That was one official interview. And she graciously granted it to me. I recall the phone call I received from the Prime Minister's house telling me to enter the complex of the Prime Minister's house through the same gate that my father, who worked for Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, used to come in each day for work. I was touched by her acknowledging the important link between us. I was seeing her as an academic, and she knew that, but she knew me well. She met me very warmly, and we discussed innumerable constraints that had been imposed on her. She was quite open about that as the precondition to her assuming office. She particularly mentioned Nawaz Sharif. So what do I do about him? He has so much money, she said. I said, one day he'll join you. And she looked at me in disbelief. But I don't think I was wrong there either. So I think that the nature of Pakistan is such that political parties eventually have to find some way to coalesce. That is, if they are opposing the establishment. So I wasn't that wrong, but she didn't believe me. I then asked her. I said, "You've become the first Prime Minister of a Muslim country in recent years. So what are you going to do with all these rebarbative laws that Ziaul Haq has left for women?" And she said, as far as I'm concerned, they don't exist, but I can't take them off the, it's a hornet's nest. I can't take them off the books. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to appoint a lot of women judges. So I smiled. I knew that this was another fluff but she did appoint women judges. How far they were able to do anything, I'm not so sure. But she did say that I can't do anything, but I don't believe them. And this point about her failure to do enough for women rankled. I remember a second occasion that we met, and this was when Bill Clinton was touring Pakistan, and they asked Hillary what she wanted, and she wanted to meet prominent women of Pakistan. And so I got invited and I went, and I was sitting on the table with Benazir and Hillary and a lawyer and a judge and Sherry Rahman. And Benazir was trying to justify her role on women and said that, yes, and there's Asma Jahangir sitting on the other table and she doesn't think I'm doing enough. And so when during the end of one course, she took Hillary to meet Asma. And I think she was aware, but she was a woman who still tried to make space, even through intense constraints imposed upon her. I'm not going to continue my stories, but I do want to mention the last occasion where she gave me what was almost a briefing. And this was in 1997 when I met her at Bunyad Haidar's house in New Jersey in the United States. And her assets had been frozen and she was complaining that she was terribly poor. And I kept reassuring her that things would be all right. But where the conversation veered yet again, was the rampant toxic misogyny of Pakistan. Why she believed she was not able to rule and have the authority she deserved. And she was bitter. She says that, none of them, they resented even having to say salam to me or saluting me every day. And she said it's rampant, and that's the major problem in Pakistan. And I think she's right. I don't think we marked her words strongly enough. It's now becoming a toxic misogyny, and it's also being given a lot of air thanks to all the technological advances humankind has made. I, of course, had the privilege of knowing Bibi very well, personally, and for several years, on account of our family friendship. I'm a very close friend of her sister, Sanam. This, however, has never prevented me from assessing her time in office, as I've done with others, with the same rigor, as I must do as a historian. People have complained to me that I have been harsh on Benazir. But I think I have, as Sanam says, she will say what has to be said. I've never actually ever had to justify. I've just had to locate her in her context, and I think she still speaks for herself as one of the great hopes this country possessed. I was reading something I'd written of her where she talks about martyrdom is our, and she's rallying for votes in Sindh, in Karachi, in Liari, and she's saying martyrdom is our creed. I think she meant it. Defying advice and probably her own better sense, she decided to return to Pakistan, as we know, in October 2007. I spoke with Sanam that day that she was, or the day before she was leaving, and she was arriving in Karachi, and Sanam was petrified. What about her security? She asked me. I replied, well, the military regime, they will have to ensure it. I said that. Little did I realize that the general in command was busy playing politics, and despite credible evidence, took no measures to assure her safety. She was allowed to die under his watch in what was a tragedy foretold. I still cannot forget her smiling face as she waved to that adoring crowd in Rawalpindi moments before her death. And no one has really said it better than Faiz, I think, who may well have said it for both father and daughter in a country that allows martyrs, but scorns populist leaders who take up cudgels against the entrenched establishment. Jis dhaj se koi mattal pe gaya, mein gaya, wo shaan salamat rehti hai. Ye jaan to aani hai, is jaan ki koi baat nahi. It is how we remember the fallen that counts, and history, and certainly the history of Pakistan, can never forget Benazir Bhutto and her role as a veritable beacon of democracy. She tried, she may not have succeeded, but she tried, and she commanded the support of many. Benazir, whose untimely death even if it does not become the basis of historic periodization of Pakistan, as I intimated at the start of my talk, I think will be considered, her death will be considered as one of the most calamitous moments in this country's checkered and increasingly disillusioning national history. Thank you very much.
Bahut shukriya. Thank you very much, Professor Ayesha. I wish there could have been time. We could have asked you a few questions, but I know you have to go, and we still have few speakers.
I'm happy to answer your questions should you have them.
Okay, so at least one.
Yeah. Let me also correct you that I am not in Karachi. I am in Lahore.
Okay.
But yes, I mean, I'm happy to answer a few questions if you have them.
I do want to ask you one question. I remember the day Bibi was assassinated, and you talk about her legacy, and you say that her party will stay on as the People's Party continued even after Bhutto's judicial murder. How do you see her legacy being carried out by her party?
Well, I mean, it has been, I mean, her legacy is unfolding as we speak. I think her son would like to continue that legacy. How far he has the autonomy to do so before a combination of factors, both within the party and without, make something of the people. I mean, already under the BB, PPP was a very different party. It was catering to the new liberal environment. So I think it has gone much further. I think neoliberalism is having its moment of reckoning. And I think the PPP needs to get wise. I mean, I think your president spoke very well, but I thought it was more of a political speech than a commemoration of Benazir Bhutto, which I think is what we are here for. But you're absolutely right. I agree with your sentiment. I think these are the thoughts that the party needs to discuss and provide people an alternate. If the PPP is also a centrist party. It wasn't in the past. And I think that now, given the extreme ill that neoliberalism as a philosophy, as a theory has been perpetrating, I think there's reason to assess. I mean, the people are talked about all the time, but their needs, I mean, they are just starving. I mean, I think that this is just a tragic story. And nobody's mentioned the environment. I am horrified with the environment in Lahore. I mean, it's most days it is hazardous and nothing is being done. You only have to wait for some natural force to give you a decent day when it's moderate there. So I think that this is slow suffocation. What the hell are they doing? So I think that had Bibi been around, I think that the country would have had a different sort of attitude. I think we're just letting things slide. There's just a great desire for performative action, not real action, not concrete action, thought through action. Everybody's acting. Everybody's playing politics. And playing politics is very addictive. You forget. You don't see yourself anymore. But I do think that Bibi's conscience still is something that I will underscore, that Bibi did have a conscience after all. That is why she came back. And she knew that she may not survive, but she came back.
I do see many people asking the permission to ask the questions, but I'm afraid we can allow only Dr. Ghazala Qazi from Washington, D.C. to Dr. Ghazala. If you can hear, you can ask one question. Iftikhar, sorry, we'll do the Q&A in the end. Dr. Ghazala Qazi, you can ask the question, please.
Sorry, there's no question. So,
Dr. Ghazala Qazi, can you hear me? So her question is, what does you think of washing away the evidence of her murder scene?
I'm absolutely flabbergasted. I mean, this is exactly what they've done to the history of your country, far less Bibi. I mean, but that's the whole tragedy. I mean, when have they ever found from day one? I mean, when did they find out who killed? I mean, we even know the assassin, but where was the larger conspiracy on Liaquat? And then she goes, and then they wash it. So, I mean, this is just, I mean, I'm flabbergasted and angry. I was angry and I remain angry.
Mushtaq, may I ask a very quick question? May I request Ms. Jalal to expand on a position of neoliberalism as opposed to neoconservatism that we saw in the Bush era? How does she distinguish between.
First of all, I really take offense to being called Ms. Jalal. I'm Dr. Jalal or Professor Jalal. I think in this, since we're talking about a grand woman, you should learn how to address women in this day and age. And I would like to be called Dr. Ayesha Jalal or just Ayesha Jalal. Do not call me Miss Ayesha Jalal, which is a very male-oriented. Excuse me. Let me make myself very clear. I'm not taking any more nonsense on this score. So yes, what do I mean by neoliberalism? Neoliberalism is replacing a variety of state regulations in favor of the market. Everything is given a value by the market. And that is what, and so even in areas where the state underperforms, like education and health, as I pointed out in South Asia, it has withdrawn, and so-called private companies are coming. Even poor people with no money prefer to go to a private doctor than to go to substandard government facilities. So that is what neoliberalism is. Neoliberalism pushes all the sort of dynamism to the market, ignores the poverty and needs of the people. So it is really a heartless ideology. It is meant for the rich to fatten them even more. It's bottom up. The people work and the rich accumulate. That's what you have to see the discrepancies in wealth. That is what neoliberalism has done. This is the Washington Consensus that was started by Maggie Thatcher, taken on by Ronald Reagan. I think it's showing cracks. And I think it's important to realize that it's showing cracks. And PPP, my answer was that the PPP needs to waken up and decide whether it wants to continue to embrace the neoliberalism of old, because neoliberalism is cracking. What is your response to that? Thank you. Thank you very much, Mushtaq.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ayesha Jalal, for